This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. Talking about foster care and adoption is one of my favorite topics and very near and dear to me, as I have pretty much worked in foster care in some capacities since I started as a social worker. I graduated from Cleveland State, two-time alumna, and I started right off the gate working in juvenile detention, and then heading to being a functional family therapist for a while. And after that is when I started my love for foster care and the kids that are in it. So I was a case manager for a while, working in the foster homes with the kids and their foster parents, as well as the agencies that serve them. I have done licensing, so getting prospective foster parents licensed to do the work that we were asking them to do in a therapeutic setting. I've also been a therapist for foster youth and a few other things, just being an outpatient therapist and now working as a clinician with children's here in Columbus with our family-based intensive treatment program. So very excited. It is a huge topic to cover. So I'll probably barely scratch the surface with some of it, but hoping that you all get at least something out of it today. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So like I was saying, foster care is a mega topic. It really has so many different kind of rabbit holes we could go down and explore. And I'm going to try to keep it about disruptions and even just going into foster care and being adopted and how that can impact our kids in whatever capacity that you're serving them or seeing them, even if it's just a family friend that you know that is fostering or has an adopted child. There are several different things that can come into play that impact their day-to-day functioning. Let's see if this, oh, hold on. It's not letting me switch my slide. Okay, let's try this one more time. There we go. So a little bit of history about foster care. The origins kind of started with the England Poor Laws in the 1500s. They weren't really created to necessarily address abuse and neglect like we would hope. It was really more so to take children that were in poor families and put them in other families and have them work as indentured servants until adulthood. In the 1800s, we started to see a little bit more of some assistance with children that were impoverished or maybe in a not so great family situation, with Minister Charles Brace creating the Children's Aid Society. He started this because there was an increase in homeless children in big cities. So he wanted to try to get them into more opportunities and really kind of had the core belief that these kids, despite their circumstances, deserve some opportunities. This also created the orphan train, which is exactly what it sounds like. Orphans being transported all across the Midwest via train and being adopted by Midwest families, primarily on farms. And then in the 1900s, we started to see a little bit more of what we have today with social service agencies starting to form. They started to actually screen and monitor and keep records of foster parents, which is what we would have hoped was happening all along, but didn't really start until the 1900s. So now in present day, we have our child welfare system, which is really a massive, massive system. We have several different departments within child welfare. You have some workers that only work with adoption. You have some workers that only work with temporary custody, only work with permanent custody. So kids that are not going back to their home of origin and are going to likely be adopted. You have people that only do screenings. We now have hotlines that you can call for abuse and neglect. So the system has greatly changed since even the 1800s. There was a push for less group homes. That was the primary way that kids were being served in displacement. It would either be group homes or like an orphanage. So we're seeing a push for less group homes and trying to get kids more individualized care. So that brings us to either being placed in a foster home or even being placed in kinship. Kinship being that they're placed with either a relative or even a close family friend, someone that they're already familiar with. And we have about 34% of the kids in the system that are in kinship placements. We have therapeutic foster homes. These foster homes are the parents are undergoing more training and have more support to hopefully deal with kids who have trauma, to deal with kids who are coming into the system and understanding the complexity of their needs. So they have to complete, I believe it is 60 hours of training each 2 years for the recertification process, and 30 hours to become a parent. You also have to complete a very intensive home study, whether you want to foster or adopt, that hopefully helps us to determine if a parent is even suitable to be working with our kids and housing them and taking care of them. I'm sure we have all heard of the stereotype that children's services just wants to take away kids, and that is not the truth. It is always the goal to reunify if that's appropriate and if that's an option. So if the family can get services, be given access to resources, and then come back to work with the kids, we would love to do that, and versus just not having them come back at all. The goal is to not be in foster care long term and to get them back to their families. We have adoption workers that primarily work with people that want to adopt. And it's really a unique opportunity to get to have workers that only want to work with families and kids that want to be adopted, because they really get to take the time to not only vet the parents and make sure it's an appropriate match, but really get to know the kid and get to know what they're looking for in a family, what their ideal situation would be, and even setting up ways to get to know the prospective family before just placing them into the home. It's not as like the movies where you just kind of pick up the kid and take them home and hope for the best. It's much more extensive of a process, and they really do try to make sure that both the family and the child are comfortable prior to that adoption being finalized. We have programs like Bridges that assist with young adults transitioning out of foster care. Coming out of foster care is hard, especially if you have had several placements. You might not have the skills that you need to be 18, 19, 20 in this crazy world that we have. So Bridges is awesome because they help kids navigate getting an education or working and keeping them linked with resources while they transition out of foster care. And then we have some laws that help us in the child welfare system. So the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act that guarantees us federal funding for all the entities that work in child welfare. And then we have the Adoption and Safe Families Act that limits how long a child can actually be in care before adoption is considered. So this graphic, hopefully it shows up well enough for all of you, is from fostermore.org. And this is actually probably a little outdated because we're grabbing this from the 2010 census. But in 2010, there were over 74 million kids in the US. And out of that 74 million, over 400,000 of them were in the foster care system. I don't know if you all can see underneath that, but it says that's roughly the population of Cleveland, Ohio. Don't know how many of you have been to Cleveland, but that kind of blew my mind to have it put into perspective that the whole population of the city of Cleveland is in the system when you think about that across the country. So that's about 1 in 184 children that are in the foster care system right now. If you go to any elementary, middle, or high school, or even thinking about your education experiences as a child, that means that you probably had maybe 2 or 3, possibly more if you went to a bigger school, of kids in your class that were in the system or had been in the system. To break that down a little bit further, that's about 52% male, 48% female, so almost half and half with the gender. And then as far as race, we have about 42% white, 24% Black or African American, 22% Latino, and then much smaller percentages with American Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, multiracial, or just being unable to determine. And then we have about 23,000 kids a year that age out of foster care. So they have turned 18 or they have graduated from high school, and they are no longer going to be staying in their foster placements, whether they've been there for a month or whether they've been there for 6 years. So that number kind of made me a little nervous because that's a lot of kids transitioning into adulthood, and we would hope that they have the support they need, but it could really kind of go either way depending on their circumstances, which we'll talk a little bit about a little bit later on. So you can't really talk about foster care without talking about PTSD. I would not like to say that every child that goes into the system has post-traumatic stress disorder, but I would say it is definitely the majority because they have experienced a frightening event or an event that was life altering. Some examples of that could be war, it could be car accidents, natural disasters, terrorism, foster care placements. If you've ever met a kid that has gone in and out of the system, come home, been taken again, come back home, that's a lot of movement and that can be traumatic for them. Domestic violence, community violence, witnessing crime, witnessing death. And trauma is so subjective, it can really look like different things for different people. What may be traumatic to me might not be traumatic for you. So we kind of have to be careful of what we categorize as trauma. But these are the things that most people would feel is undisputed that that would be a traumatic event. Some symptoms that help us diagnose PTSD are flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, anxiety, depression, irritability, trouble concentrating, sleep difficulties, aggressive behavior, avoidance. And there are several others, but just to give a snapshot of what that could kind of look like in a child's behavior. And then if we look at the impact of PTSD, this could be short-term or long-term, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, panic attacks, self-sabotaging behavior, gastrointestinal disorders, autoimmune disorders, emotional instability, isolation, memory issues, really anything that could potentially impact their day-to-day functioning or make it harder for them to function in their everyday lives. So I do have a quick video, it's about 4 minutes, just kind of explaining a little bit more about how foster care impacts the child's brain, because that is not my scope. So I thought that this video would explain it much better than I probably ever could. So hopefully it'll let me play it here and we won't have any difficulties. 1 second, let me make sure. Share sound. Okay, can we see the video okay?
No, we cannot.
Okay. 1 second.
Enters.
When you go to press share sound or share screen, there's 2 things at the bottom. Click share sound and optimize for video clip.
Oh, okay.
That way everybody can hear you, or hear the video. Sorry.
Okay, so we got share sound and optimize. Okay, can we see the screen now? It's a little gray.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Hopefully it plays the sound, but if not, just let me know.
Okay.
When a child enters foster care, that child has likely experienced instability, causing a disruption in brain development. Foster care may further add to the damage, especially in children who are moved from family to family.
Do I think, as scientists say, that multiple foster placements affect brain chemistry? Yeah, 100%, definitely. I know when I think about like where I am in life compared to my friends around the same age who grew up with semi-normal families or more normal than multiple houses, there's definitely just some emotional differences and some just overall like mentality differences on life, where we want to be, where we want to go.
There is still debate among scientists on how much damage is coming from abuse and neglect or multiple placements. But researchers say forcing a child to endure those placements can disrupt the neural connections in their frontal lobes. Most affected, researchers say, are the brain's prefrontal cortex and the HPA axis. The prefrontal cortex manages a person's inhibitory controls. It manages self-control, basically the ability to make good choices and holding back from making bad ones. Difficulty with inhibitory controls can lead to school failure, discipline issues, and often causes a child to be moved to another family.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've gone through multiple counselors. I've been given multiple diagnoses, depression, anxiety. all kinds of different things. I have gotten to the point where I've accepted them, but I try not to let that necessarily define me. Like, sometimes it's hard. I feel like for me, the anxiety is worse. I go through those phases of depression, but I feel like the anxiety is worse, and I can easily let that like just take over and almost blame or use it like to blame it on why I'm doing something.
Researchers have also found differences in the way foster kids handle stress. An area known as the HPA axis is responsible for regulating the hormone cortisol to handle stressful situations. In a normal cycle, when you wake up, your body will have a high level of cortisol. The process starts off with the hypothalamus sending a signal to the pituitary gland. Then the pituitary gland sends its signal through the body to the adrenal glands, where it releases cortisol to the rest of the body to get ready for the day. By bedtime, cortisol levels will drop close to zero. Foster kids who have endured repeated trauma have their HPA axes thrown off kilter. Their bodies were in constant stress levels that pushed their HPA axis too hard and too fast. The result is a downshift in cortisol. The cortisol levels become flat. When they wake up, it's low, and at bedtime, it's not low enough. In children, a dysregulated HPA system can lead to PTSD, anxiety, depression, and disruptive disorders. Foster care researchers believe there are ways to reverse the effects by providing foster kids with a safe, nurturing, permanent home.
Find them a place to stay until then. I'd rather get attached for a small period of time and understand what love and happiness is for a small period of time than repeatedly get ripped from something that I feel safe in.
Okay, let me bring up our PowerPoint again. If anyone is interested, that channel, I believe it's Kansas City Star, has some other videos also that they have one that even talks about the kids' perspective of going through the system. That was really good. It was about 5 minutes. If you want to check those out, but YouTube has so many different videos that talk about kids' experiences in foster care and what that is like for them, as well as the workers, the foster parents. It's a ton of videos. So they kind of start to touch on what placements can do when we are moving kids around and how that impacts their brain. Does anyone have any ideas, or maybe even from experiences in your work or personal life, of why placements are getting disruptive in foster and adoptions?
The youth maybe coming in between, like the parents, like driving a wedge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one.
I found that sometimes, challenging behavior, and also just a lack of, wherever that comes in, but some kind of miscommunication, or foster parents not getting a lot of information about what to expect with this youth. And then they think they can do it, and then they can't.
Absolutely.
Similar to that, sometimes foster parents don't feel like they have the support to deal with some of the behaviors that they encounter when dealing with the youth. I recently had a foster parent reach out to me for parenting class, a worker reach out to me for parenting classes for a foster parent. And someone said, well, why would they need parenting classes? They're a foster parent. And I had to explain, to support them with some of the behaviors that they encounter, or encountering behaviors that maybe they didn't receive training on. It's something that they may be willing to deal with if they were able to have support.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example.
This is Scott from PCSAO. I agree with everything that's been said. I think there are also just some big systemic issues that we're hearing from county children's services agencies in the field. A lot of our experienced foster caregivers who have maybe 20 years behind them are retiring, and it's very hard to recruit new foster parents. And the ones we have are not as experienced, not able to access the kinds of supports they need to address some serious mental health issues that we're seeing in youth. We have a national mental health crisis among youth right now. And in fact, a lot of children, as much as 1 in 4, according to our report, are coming into custody, not primarily because of abuse or neglect, but because of their untreated behavioral health, developmental disability, and juvenile correction diversion issues. And so we're getting a lot of children that that our foster caregivers and our caseworkers, quite frankly, aren't really trained to work with, because they don't come in presenting primarily with abuse and neglect. They need support from other systems, and particularly juvenile correction diversions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, you all have identified some really impactful reasons why we see some disruptions. Some other things that I've seen are medical issues. A lot of foster parents are older or have run into a medical issue that just requires more energy and time, and they won't be able to sustain the placement. Not even necessarily because of anything the child has done, but just while they battle their own health issues or family issues, moving away. We see a lot of different reasons, but I would say primarily it is, as some of you identified, we don't have the resources to properly train and support the parents. And then kids are coming in with extreme mental health issues or behavioral issues, and no one on the team, including the foster parent, sometimes even the workers, know how to properly address that. And unfortunately, that can mean that we will have to disrupt the placement. Sorry, this is not letting me move to my next slide. But the next slide was really just some impact considerations of why disrupting placements, or how disrupting placements can impact our kids. Just some examples that I had on the slide were separating siblings. So ideally, we would like to place kids with their sibling group. Now, if you have a sibling group of like 4 or 5 siblings, a foster home might not be equipped to handle that, or they might not have the beds, they might not have the space, they might not have the enough adults really in the home to handle that. So potentially siblings can be separated, or if one sibling, let's say we have a brother and sister and they get placed together, the brother could be thriving in the placement and the sister is not doing so well. It might be more impactful to separate them. So what we'll do is disrupt the entire placement, and now we have to find a new placement for not just one child, but 2. So that is one of the things that can come up even after they've already been removed from the home. Now there's potential that they will not be able to stay together with their siblings. Interrupted education comes up a lot. Sometimes kids can stay in their school system that they were previously living in, depending on just the location of the foster home. But a lot of times when they move, they're now moving into a different school system. That can make it harder to get things like IEPs and 504 started. They're meeting new teachers constantly, new peer groups, and it's just really hard to get into the groove of your education when you're constantly moving around. That can also lead to difficulty forming attachments. They might have a hard time making friends. They might have a hard time trusting their foster parents. Or we can even see they're getting too attached too quickly. They've been there for 2 days and they're already calling the parents mom and dad, and talking about when they get adopted, what they want their room to look like. So there can be some dysregulation in their ability to form attachments. Increased risk for things like human trafficking, substance abuse, and criminal activity. I would say that some of that is a systematic thing. I don't want to use the phrase fall through the cracks, but sometimes we're just trying to get kids the bare minimum, that we're not looking at the potential risk factors that they might be running into for some of these more serious things, on top of the barriers they're already facing. decreased self-esteem and self-worth, lack of independent living skills, which we kind of talked about with the Bridges program, mental illness, exposure to unsafe environments. I would love to say every foster home that gets licensed is safe and clean and in the best neighborhoods and in the best school systems, but unfortunately that is just not what it is. And sometimes kids are exposed to different variables that they were not exposed to in their previous homes. They could have a skewed perception of formal systems like child welfare, police, even medical systems like coming to the hospital. They could see those as negative things and not as helpful things because of their experiences in the past. Feeling unstable mentally and physically, lack of family traditions, and displacement from their culture, their values, and religion, just to name a few things that they may be impacted if they are removed from foster homes or even removed from adoptive placements. I believe it is 10% of adoptive placements are disrupted and children end up in foster care. So we would like to find forever homes for every child. And just because it is a legal document saying that you are now adopted does not mean that they have to stay there. So that can also add more complexities to their already difficult time that they may be having if you are adopted and are then put back into the system. So as I said in the beginning, this topic is so vast. There's so many things that I wish we could have covered a little bit more, but I did want to give you all opportunities for any questions or feedback, comments before the case presentation.